Resident Evil, a series very dear to my and other countless survival horror fans' hearts, because believe it or not, that was the focus of the series prior to some iffy recent titles. Those ones aside, I love the Resident Evil franchise, from its characters, monsters, creepy atmosphere, to even its cheesy moments.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
That one never gets old. Anyhow, as you can probably guess from this video title, I also love its boss battles, which are a bit underrated in my eyes. Even though I'll be the first one to admit that the series, like most video game franchises, has a share of stinkers in terms of bosses, I'm looking at you, Halos. There are a great amount of encounters that truly highlight strengths of this long-running franchise. For this list, I'll be looking at both the main series and spin-offs, as well as judging them on appearance, role, gameplay, and of course how thrilling the encounter is. I will also only be picking one boss per game, because let's be honest, this list would be 50% Resident Evil 4 bosses, if not. Now with that out of the way, let's dive headfirst into this batch of nightmares. Starting off this list is the very first boss of the very first game, or at least the remake of it, the Titanic tumor-filled serpent, Yawn. And yes, that is its real name. Anyways, Yawn was like most monsters in the Spencer Mansion, a former Umbrella test subject that escaped and started stalking the grounds. Being first encountered in the attic after you heal Richard of his poison-inflicted wounds, which I also wonder where he got them from, Yawn will attack you as you try to obtain the death mask. During this time, you have to fend it off in order to make it retreat, while avoiding being bitten and surrounded by its coils in order to escape. Shortly after, Yawn will reappear and ambush you in the library, forcing you to restrict Yawn's movements by giving it the run around the bookshelves in order to get in some puck shots here and there. Even though it's a bare bones fights, which is kind of a trend in the first Resident Evil game, the use of the environment in order to slow down this voracious viper and setting up your expectations for future encounters for not only this game, but the entire series, guaranteed a spot on this list. Also, if you play as Jill, it kills Richard! Poor old lovable Richard! Thankfully, Richard will avoid this fate if you play as never mind. Someone report Richard for feeding. Resident Evil Outbreak is a pretty underrated game in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, it has plenty, and I do mean plenty of flaws, but I feel that it should have been completely forgotten to the point that everyone completely ignores it. This survival co-op spin-off, set during the Raccoon City incident, may not have been the biggest seller, but it did offer numerous interesting scenarios and eventually gained an expansion called Resident Evil Outbreak File 2, where my personal favorite scenario, the final mission, was introduced, properly titled, End of the Road. During this mission, your team is making one final push to escape the Doomed City while being pursued by one final tyrant. So naturally, the tyrant shows up for one last oh Jesus Christ, what is that? This is Nyx, an unknown bioweapon of unknown origins that just ate your pursuer like it was nothing, while also guaranteeing you will never have a good night's sleep again. This thing has hands down the most disturbing design I've ever seen in a Resident Evil game, and I can assure you my eyes have seen a lot of disturbing shit in this series. What makes this thing so frightening to me is that you don't know anything about this abomination, or even if it's an original project of the T-Virus or something even worse. All we know is that it escaped its containment and turned its would-be transporters into its arm. Combat-wise, it attacks mainly by swinging its arms, tendrils, and by firing globs of itself around the area, but it can also absorb one of the player characters if they're not careful. This thing is extremely resilient, requiring high-powered weapons or a good old-fashioned knife, but you can also use the detonators inside the tyrant it absorbed to your advantage if you manage to save them up to this point. What keeps Nyx so low on this list, besides not being the most entertaining final boss, is the fact that it can be completely skipped altogether by instead choosing to escape by helicopter. Nonetheless, I wouldn't mind seeing something like Nyx making some sort of return in the future. Its potential is unfortunately endless. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is a strange game in my eyes. Filled with some interesting choices both good and ill, especially when it came down to the new characters, but the boss fight against former TerrorSave member Nell Fisher was surprisingly well thought out. Nell was originally a member of the FBC, or Federal Bioterrorism Commission, but after the disbandment at the end of Resident Evil Revelations 1, Nell decided to join TerrorSave, only to betray them by teaming up with Alex Rascal, leading to everyone's capture and placement on a biohazardous island in the middle of nowhere. His reason for this? To bring back the FBC through acts of bioterror in order to warrant its resurrection. Of course, trusting anyone with the last name of Wesker proved to be his undoing, and Nemesis himself betrayed when Alex injected him with her own unique strand of the Ouroboros virus, mutating him into a muscle-bound juggernaut that I thought could only exist on DeviantArt. Despite retaining most of his intelligence, Neo fights with pretty basic attacks at the beginning, mainly with charges and trying to punch you into oblivion. But as the fight progresses, so does his mutation, eventually consuming one of his arms, turning it into a horrific hawk of tendrils, thus increasing his attack range. Thankfully, the area is filled with gas tanks, which means you get to set him on fire.
Burn to the ground! Burn! Burn!
This will reveal his weak point, but Neo will be able to use water pipes in order to extinguish the flames. It's an intense fight made all the better when you're able to expose him as the hypocrite he is. Not that he cares much about that anymore. After defeating him, Neo will make one last lunge before being finished off by either Claire or Maria. Surprisingly enough, this is the one choice that determines whether or not you get the good or bad ending. For the good ending, Maria has to be the one to finish him off, because character development or something like that. But does she really have to end it on one of the worst one-liners I have ever heard?
I don't want to tell no Tom!
I hope you're proud of yourself. Number 7 is Nemesis. Okay, I know I'm putting him a bit lower than y'all would expect, but let me explain. Besides the fact that I just prefer the other top 6 more. Now there's no denying Nemesis is a classic. He's basically the poster boy for the entire franchise, despite having only appeared in one game. A game that's literally named after him. But my main issue with Nemesis is that there may be too much of him. Think about it, besides Nemesis, the only other boss in Resident Evil 3 is Gravedigger, and the numerous encounters with Nemesis make up a pretty good chunk of the actual game, making it feel a bit tedious in my eyes. That aside, I frickin' love Nemesis. His design is classic, his role is classic, his one line is classic. Classic. Despite what I said earlier, every encounter with Nemesis invokes some feeling of panic, often forcing you to either fight or find some form of escape. But every time you are forced to fight him, it's great to see you slowly but surely wear down this nearly unstoppable force, eventually turning the tables on your would-be pursuer. Eventually, after filling this thing up with enough lead to replace every cell on its body, blowing it up on a train, and giving it a dip in a chemical bath, you eventually force it to absorb the cells of an already dead tyrant in order to survive, causing it to mutate into its final form. And behold, as this undescribable terror slowly crawls towards you in a very disappointing manner. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, Nemesis' final mutation is kind of a letdown. Although, you do get to finish it off with a whale cannon, and it ends on one hell of a one-liner.
You want stars? I'll give you stars.
You see that, Maria? That's how it's done. The Resident Evil franchise is no stranger to tragic bosses, from Lisa Trevor to Nosferatu. But if there was one boss's backstory that doesn't get enough credit in the Resident Evil fandom, it is easily Hilda Hidalgo from Resident Evil Darkside Chronicles' original story, Operation Javier, where she is originally encountered by Leon and Krauser as they discovered an injured Manuela inside a flooded church. Even though you're not aware of the creature's intentions at the time, the alien like Hilda proves to be a resourceful opponent, using the water to its advantage in order to avoid your shots. At least until you drop a chunk of the church onto its head, forcing a retreat. Later, it is revealed that this deformed monster is in fact Manuela's mother, and the wife to the story's main villain, Javier, who used the T-virus on her to save her from her cancer, and then the T-Veronica virus to save her from that, resulting in the deformed monstrosity she is now. Yet despite losing any resemblance to her past humanity, she still maintained her love for her daughter, and maybe even a bit for her husband, but mainly for her daughter. Unfortunately for you, her love for her family drives her to have one final showdown after being ordered by Javier, literally turning red with anger and hardening her skin to bulletproof levels. She's actually a pretty tough boss considering how small her one weak point is, combined with all her jumping around, not to mention all the projectiles she sends your way. But after a few well-placed shots, eventually be able to put Hilda out of her misery, but not before she's able to severely injure Krauser's arm, which I'm sure had no negative consequences for the future. Thankfully, she does have one final tear-jerking farewell to her daughter, which I'm totally not going to ruin by making the obvious joke. It would just be too easy. Resident Evil 6 is understandably seen as the worst of the main series games, although I strongly disagree with that statement since I believe that honor should go to Resident Evil 5. But that's a discussion for another day. Although my main reason is that 6 actually had some pretty memorable and exciting moments, with the encounter with Illusia easily being the best the game has to offer. Now let me get this out of the way. Illusia is encountered in Chris's campaign, which is definitely the worst of the four, and yet despite that fact, this fight shines beautifully, and that is actually quite the testament to this battle if I'm being honest. Illusia, or as I like to call him, Yarn 2.0, is a gigantic snake that is a definite homage to the original serpent. Inflicted with the C virus, it has the ability to completely camouflage itself, aside from the inside of its creepy, moving, teeth-filled mouth. It's actually an extremely intense encounter, with it picking off your comrades one by one in numerous ambushes as you realize you're the ones being hunted, really keeping you on your toes since you have no idea where it will strike next. After nearly having your entire group wiped out, you track it into a butcher shop where you'll be able to face it head on. Since it is nearly invisible, you're forced to carefully listen and watch for the movements of the hooked slabs of meat in order to pinpoint its location to avoid its attacks. After wearing it down and a few jump scares, you manage to corner it into a flooded area and electrocute it to death. It's a thrilling experience that really stands out in a very lackluster game. If only the final bosses were like this. When it came to choose a boss from Resident Evil Code Veronica, my personal favorite Resident Evil game, I'd be lying if I said it was a close call, because my number 4 pick is easily the blonde bombshell, the fire startle, that nasty queen, Alexia Ashford. Being genetically engineered to be a genius in order to save the Ashford name and maintain their placement in Umbrella, she practically developed a god complex due to her upbringing. Hell, she was so high up on herself, she could put Wesker in his place. Alexia's life's work was the Veronica virus, and she was so determined to fully control it that she voluntarily froze herself for nearly 15 years after injecting herself with it. She would later be forced to wake up early and test out her new powers when Claire, Steve, Chris, and Wesker invaded her Antarctic base. After toying with them for a bit, Alexia mutates, or should I say combusts, into her first form, which aside from giving her a plant-like look and hands down the greatest theme in the entire franchise, also made her blood flammable once it was exposed to air, which she can spray out constantly, making her quite the fire startle. In her second form, despite being immobile, she can be pretty tricky due to her infinite swarm of insects and her huge tentacles which are always on the attack. Her final form is actually pretty easy since it only takes one shot from your newly acquired linear launcher, blessed be thy tech. Of course, that's easier said than done since she's so goddamn nimble in this form that she makes for a very difficult target, but once you hit her, she just pops like a balloon. All in all, Alexia made for a great climactic villain for the game, and an even more deadly opponent. Thank God her trend didn't nearly pose as much of a threat. As I joked about in the intro to this video, that without the one boss per game rule, the bosses of Resident Evil 4 would dominate this list. But I can only pick one of them, so who should it be? The intimidating Mendez? El Gigante, a boss so good they whipped it off twice? Sadler? No, just no. For my pick, I have to give it to the one that actually put me on edge and installed a deep sense of paranoia into my psyche. The Verdugo, literally meaning executioner in Spanish, and being one of Salazar's insectoid bodyguards. Being one of the toughest bosses in the entire series, the Verdugo is a creature that just oozes nightmare fuel. Just look at it, it's a goddamn xenomorph minus the dickhead. Heck, even it kind of fights like one. When Leon is dropped into the sewers via a classic trapdoor, the Verdugo will perform surprise attacks with its tail through various openings, which you have to avoid in order to get to the power room. Once there, Verdugo will reveal itself once the power to the elevator is turned on, and despite not having the most original move pool, it hits pretty damn hard, and it can soak up a ridiculous amount of damage. What I like most about this encounter is that you don't actually have to kill it. You just have to survive it until the elevator arrives in order to escape. But for those who want to put this poor thing out of its misery, your best bet is to use the canisters of liquid nitrogen in order to freeze it, causing it to take much more damage from your firearms. It can be a long and difficult fight, but a very satisfying one if you choose to go through with it. Thankfully, you never have to fight the other one, since Sazalov fused it along with himself with the Queen Parasite. For a second there, I thought this was going to be a challenge. Taking second place is William Balkan. I'm sorry, I really wanted to be more original and have something like Mr. X or the Surrogator be the representative for Resident Evil 2, but I can't. I just can't lie to myself. The main antagonist of Resident Evil 2 and the creator of the G virus, William Balkan was a head scientist for Umbrella before he was betrayed by said corporation, forcing him to inject himself with his creation, as well as accidentally releasing the T virus into Raccoon City, starting the entire crisis. Now trapped in an ever-worsening mutation, Balkan is forced to hunt down his own daughter due to the virus's need to find suitable hosts, all the while slowly having his humanity stripped away, with each mutation being powerless to stop himself from harming his loved ones. In that sense, William was originally quite a tragic figure, at least until Capcom decided to portray him more as a jackass in the later games.
I will take over your research.
William Balkan started the whole growing mutation trend that nearly every other Resident Evil villain would soon follow after, and in my opinion none have been able to top. Each form feels like a natural step up from one another, but still managed to be original and more threatening than the last. Of course, in order to face off with all 5 forms, you have to play through both the A and B routes of Resident Evil 2, basically making this boss one of the primary reasons to play through this game multiple times. And you know, I actually like that, since in order to fully experience the boss, you have to fully experience the game first. It's a nice touch. Of course, despite numerous face-offs, Balkan shows up one last time in a nearly unrecognizable blob-like form as Leon, Claire, and Shirley try to escape through the underground rails, forcing one last battle before blowing him and the train to smithereens. It just goes to show you that not every Resident Evil boss needs to be killed by a goddamn RPG or a missile launcher. Sometimes you just need a train. For my number 1 pick, I had to go with a boss that truly represented the Resident Evil franchise in its entirety, while at the same time bringing something new to the table. And for me, there's only one boss that fits that description. My number 1 pick for my favorite boss in all of Resident Evil is Jack Norman, aka Ultimate Abyss from Resident Evil Revelations. Being one of the main villains of the game, Jack was the leader of the terrorist group known as Vulture, that caused numerous outbreaks due to believing that the human race had become sinful and corrupted. Secretly funded and manipulated by Morgan, former head of the FBC, Jack and his group would later be betrayed by Morgan right after unleashing the T-Abyss virus on Terra Gigia, causing both him and his men to be trapped on a sunken cruise ship to be left for dead. However, when Chris and Jill finally investigate the ship in order to find a connection between the FBC and the attack on Terra Gigia, they find Jack as the sole survivor on the ship despite having been trapped on there for over an entire year. Left broken from the betrayal, isolation, and watching all his men die, Jack in typical Resident Evil fashion injects himself with the T-Abyss virus, turning him into basically a freaky fish guy.
I am not a freaky fish guy.
All joking aside, the final fight against Ultimus is actually pretty challenging, since Abyss fights with a combination of illusions and teleportations, powers that are uniquely to him in the series. While his powers may seem like they come out of nowhere, I have a theory behind them, and while it may not be proven true, this is how I've always viewed the boss. In this series, especially in the older games, whenever someone mutates, a part of their personality is manifested somehow. For William Balkan, he became a single-minded objective-focused monster. For Alexia, she literally became the insectoid queen to match her view of herself. And there are so many other examples I could just go on and on about them. As for Jack, despite not knowing much about him, we knew he was a paranoid and disillusioned man who managed to survive an entire year on a sunken ship based on his revenge alone. So with that into consideration, his powers in fight make much more sense. He is literally using his own delusions in order to backstab you and take you by surprise, just like what happened to him when he was betrayed by Morgan. And it's these little details is what really makes this fight amazing in my eyes. Or I could just be looking far too deep into this. Who knows? All I can say is that when this battle is finished, even Jill and Chris have sympathy for this terrorist. Paired with an impressive theme and location, Ultimate Abyss has managed to combine everything I love about this franchise into a single fight. It's panic-inducing, thought-provoking, tragic, and even a little goofy. And with that, I have finally concluded my top 10 favorite bosses in Resident Evil. Hopefully I managed to show off why I love this series so much, and maybe even convince some of you to check out these games for yourselves. Even though Resident Evil has been on a bit of a rocky path since the last few titles, I really hope that the new Resident Evil 7 game will manage to bring back the series into a much better light for both older fans and newcomers. And with that, I wish you all a good day or good night. This has been the Toxic Trister, and I'm out, everybody.